Welcome to the Help Podcast. In this episode by Marielle Michael, Nikki Cunningham, Jenna Mason, and Ava Nardiello, we will be discussing Kathryn Stockett's debut novel, The Help. The novel explores the complex relationship between white Southern families and their black servants during the 1960s. A social awakening as seen from both sides of the American racial divide. The book gives millennials only a small taste of the harsh treatment members of the black community experienced during this time in American history. The book was a #1 New York Times bestseller. A movie based on The Help, directed by Stockett's childhood friend Tate Taylor, was released in August of 2011 by DreamWorks Studio. To start out the discussion, let's talk about the similarities and differences between the book and the movie.
Well, in the movie, you basically just get the experience of just being handed all the information to you. You can see that there's a lot of segregation in the time, but you can also see the connection between the slaves and their work and how much care they put into it because that's how they make their living. And within the book, you can tell that the writer carefully writes everything so you can see how detailed it was back then to make sure everything was done right and that slaves had the same procedure every single day.
Also, in the book, you can really tell, like she said, it's precisely written, but in the movie, it all comes to life and you can clearly see everything that you imagined in your mind. It's all fully, depicted there in the right way.
I think it just depends on the person who wants to hear the story, because some people like to visualize their own story. So whenever you read the book, it's left up to the imagination to what you want to see. But throughout the movie, you get a clear depiction of what actually happens, and that works better for some viewers.
Something that I noticed was watching the movie first and then going back and reading the book really helped me understand the concept and the real story behind the book. Just because it was fiction doesn't mean that what happened wasn't something real and that people didn't experience those things. And I just felt like the book was really well written because you can actually feel the pain and the joy and just the different emotions that the people went through during that time.
Also, you get to see what life was like from the slave's point of view. Usually you see it from the white point of view, but it's different, and you really see how much they struggled and how different the divide was and how brutal everything they went through was.
Something that I noticed was Stockett's style of writing was just making sure that the reader can connect to whatever she wrote on the paper. So when it transfers from the different characters narrating, you can honestly just step into their shoes and realize, oh, Aibileen was scared that what happened to her son was going to happen to her, and Minnie felt really oppressed by her owner, and so she felt like she had to get back. And then Miss Celia, although she was white, she still felt some sort of segregation because the ladies would not let her into the clique, and that's all she wanted was to be accepted.
The chapters were narrated by different people affected the reader's experience.
Well, I believe that every chapter named after each person had a different effect on the reader. You wouldn't know if you were listening to Abileen's chapter, you wouldn't know how Miss Skeeter feels about certain things happening in her life, and I think it just really it gives an omniscient view. Omniscient view of how the person felt through each experience they were facing, because not the only person that can understand what they're feeling is each person. And when you go through Abileen's chapter, she talks about losing her son, which was a big part of her world stopping, and she says that she realizes that the world outside didn't stop just because hers did, and it made her want to work for what she got in life and work harder just for the sake of
And hearing everyone's side of the story as a whole makes you fully understand what the whole help is about, why everyone goes through their own struggles, and everyone is fighting for something.
Yeah.
And there's a quote that says, as for your mama, she didn't pick her life, it picked her. But you're going to do something big with yours, you wait and see.
Yeah.
And basically that means you don't like I said, you don't get to choose your life, but you gotta do what you can to make it great, because we all have our own struggles, and everyone clearly in the book is not perfect and has our own struggles, and especially in that time period, Aibileen had the worst experiences, but she did what she could to make it great and trudged through.
Although the book's layout is based on the different characters and them narrating their own story, you can tell that Stockett puts herself in that person's shoes, and she writes from that person's perspective, personally, and she talks about Minnie's childhood, and then she talks about how Miss Celia wants to have that journal life of just having a rich husband and having kids and being able to cook, and that just really affects her throughout the story. And then how Aibileen just really day to day finds the strength through her work, even though she doesn't like to admit it, but she enjoys what she does. And I just thought it was cool how the author was able to transition so fast but still keep the reader intrigued at the same time.
Yeah, and it's there's also you just understand through each person's perspective, and Miss Skeeter, she wanted, although this book is mainly based around the racial divide faced in this time period, you also see how Miss Skeeter, she wants to do something with her life. She wants to be a writer, and even though her mother wants her to be married and live a life with children and stuff, Miss Skeeter knows what she wants to do and make a difference both for women and for black suffrage.
So how do you guys think that the very first bridge meeting that we read about affected the whole entire tone of the book?
Well, I believe that this really showed the true colors of the women that Miss Leafault was around, and when they saw that Miss Aibileen was going to the same restroom that they were all using, which was the guest bathroom, they had questioned why she didn't create a separate bathroom for her. And I think that Miss Leafault was more worried about her social status rather than the caring of her servant. It had never affected her until this moment in time when the women had asked her why her servant was using the same restroom. And I think this speaks a lot for the time period. If her friends hadn't said anything, then she wouldn't ever have thought to separate them. It's almost like the Jim Crow laws that were set, and it's if this president had taken place with multiple women because they're all worried about status, then it sets back the movement to further the equality for blacks, both women and men. So I think it sets a tone that social status really meant a lot more than actual discrimination.
And like Ava said, it really sets it really gives you the idea of who everyone is. That's most importantly, you already get to know who's going to be the most problematic one, who's the one that's going to help the servants realize I can help you, I'm going to use my privilege to help you, and I'm with you on whatever's going on.
And I think the author, she right off the bat, she wanted us to know who the
antagonists?
Yeah, the antagonists and the protagonists were, because I think that's really vital information to play out the rest of the book.
Yeah, and you hear Miss Skeeter ask Aibileen if she wishes things were different, and that automatically lets you know that Miss Skeeter is gonna use she has something in mind for the future that you can kind of foreshadow what's gonna happen. So.
And that gives us, like you said, foreshadowing that she's gonna be a really important character, so we can keep an eye out for her role in the whole entire book.
And it helps you look out for symbols throughout the entire book, and it's a very good beginning to a book to set the whole precedent.
Okay, so going off what we were just talking about with the whole servant bathrooms and stuff, how do you what do you think the Home Health Sanitation Initiative says about that time period and the people we read about?
I think it showed those who chose to participate in the book and getting the outhouse in their backyard, just to show that black people don't matter and that they don't need to have the same rights and be able to use the same bathroom as white people, I think it showed that those who bought it were just generally scared because they knew what black people were capable of, and they knew that they were starting to get their way and that things were starting to change, and that was just another way for them to say, no, we're going to try and make times even worse, and we're just going to make sure that you don't get to do what we do because we're just better. But I think that the initiative, like, that was something in the book that really was a turning point, because that's when Skeeter realized, wait a minute, this really isn't right, and I can't believe my friends are choosing to do this, and one of my best friends is making this a community-wide thing.
And that was, it gave you a major insight into actual real problems and during that time period, because segregation was a huge thing. Like, we all know that black people were seen as less intelligent, less important, less smart, carry diseases and whatnot, all these terrible things, and that fully showed an example of like actual real-time problems that happened.
And I think, like, going along with what we said in the intro, it really just shows people like us, like young kids, like, who weren't there to actually experience it, and we really, like, I feel like in a way, like, school systems try and really keep that out of their what's the thing called? Their
Rights?
No, they're like
Platform.
like their lesson plan,
Okay,
so to speak.
yeah.
And I feel like it really just gives, like, it gives kids, or, like, you know, people who weren't around, insight to what truly happened, because a lot of times what really did happen and what black people really did experience was sugar-coated.
Blinded.
Yeah, like, because nobody really wants to think about how terrible conditions were, so they'd rather just forget about it or make it seem less harsh than it was. And we really got to see that it was horrible.
Yeah, and obviously, like, the white women didn't understand the oppression that the black women faced, because they weren't ever, like, submerged in that kind of world that of, like, oppression and, like, the separate but equal, but it was never really equal. It was just a way to it just made people feel better about themselves, just like how they used to make slaves, like, read Bible verses, because it like justified their actions, and it's just, like, a lot of times it got blinded by, like, what was actually happening, and, like, they just, because it made you cooler, or, like, it made you more popular in the society that you lived in, then it was, like, just viewed as another thing that was normal. Like, it was part of everyday life, so not many people knew different from what was going on.
And also, things are definitely different than they were back in that time period, but, like, we're still not equal to each other. Like, times are definitely still worse, matter is still definitely worse, but it helps us understand how far we've come. We still have so much to work on, but we've come so far from being segregated, not being able to talk to like a white person, or not being able to look at it like a black person, like it was seen as taboo or anything. But now we're still not equal, but we still see where we came from. We still have a platform to build upon and work on making our society better for both equal races.
So, in conclusion, how do you guys think the book affected your views, or, like, what you thought you knew about that time period?
For me personally, like, even though I am black, like, I guess, like, every time I read something that has to do with slavery or segregation period, I honestly feel like I make just a deeper connection every time, and that I walk away with, like, a new experience. And I thought Catherine Stockett really did an excellent job in, like, informing readers that this is actually what people used to go through. Even though it's fiction, doesn't mean what she put was not true, and that some slaves did not feel like this, and that some white people didn't connect with the slaves and the black people in trying to make things better.
Yeah, and I think, like as a white woman, like, I obviously, like, I have I don't understand like the hard times that we're faced and like what Black women and men have to go through every day. But I think this always like you said, Jenna, like going like reading and learning new things about like what servants and slaves went through like deepens my understanding of what like the horrible things that were done, and it makes me like glad to realize that like I'm not living in that time period, and that we don't have to like I don't have to see the sufferings that they faced. So I think it's like Catherine Stockett did do a very, very fantastic job of like portraying how horrible things were, and like through a fiction book you feel it as though it's fiction as nonfiction, because they're very real struggles that like women faced, like Black women faced.
And also, like, reading this book is so empowering because it makes me want to make a change for the society. Because, like I said before, like, we're still not equal and we still have a lot to do, and reading that book just made me realize, like, there's so much to improve on, and we can really work hard to make a change, like, because we have the power. We're young, we're the new generation, we can do this, and we have all the power in our hands.
All right, awesome. That's all for this episode of The Help.
Thanks.
Okay, bye. All right, cool, awesome.
Adios.
Okay, bye.